This happened to me about 6 years ago when I was 23. At the time, I was living with a roommate named Ethan in a small 2-bedroom apartment just outside of Portland, Oregon. We weren't best friends or anything. We met through Craigslist when I was looking for someone to split rent with. He seemed quiet, polite, and normal enough when I first met him. He said he worked nights at a warehouse, so we barely saw each other, which honestly, I liked. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. We'd cross paths maybe once or twice a week. He'd usually be heading out when I got home from my job at a hardware store. He always wore the same gray hoodie, and he never really talked much. One night in December, around 1 a.m., I was lying in bed watching Netflix when I heard the front door creak open. Ethan must have come home from work. But then I realized something weird. He usually slammed the door shut, heavy-handed, like he didn't care about the noise. This time, it opened slowly, almost silently. I muted my laptop. I could hear faint footsteps walking down the hallway. They were slow, almost hesitant. Then they stopped right outside my bedroom door. I sat up, heart pounding. I expected a knock or maybe for him to say something. But there was just silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. After maybe 20 seconds, I finally said, "Hey, Ethan, everything good?" No reply. The footsteps moved away, back toward the living room. I waited a minute, then got out of bed and opened my door. The lights in the hallway were off. Only the living room lamp was on, dimly glowing. "Ethan?" I called out again. Nothing. I checked his room. His door was closed. But I noticed something. A faint beam of light coming from the crack underneath. So I figured maybe he just didn't hear me. I went back to bed. The next morning, when I saw him making coffee in the kitchen, I casually mentioned what happened. "Did you come home around 1 last night?" I asked. He looked at me kind of blankly and said, "No, man. I stayed at work late. Didn't get home till 3. He even showed me a time-stamped text from his boss. I didn't know what to say. I brushed it off, assuming maybe I'd imagined it or something. A week later, around 2 a.m., I was half asleep when I heard that same sound. The front door opening softly. I froze again. Footsteps down the hallway. And then, my bedroom door handle slowly turned. My stomach dropped. Someone was on the other side. I shouted, "Ethan, what the hell are you doing?" Instantly, the handle stopped moving. Then, quick footsteps back down the hall. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I kept near my dresser, and ran out into the living room. The door was slightly open. Cold air rushed in. No one was there. I called Ethan's phone, but he didn't answer. About 15 minutes later, he called me back. He sounded groggy, said he was still at work, so whoever had just opened that door wasn't him. The next morning, we checked the door lock. It wasn't broken or forced, but our spare key was missing. We kept it in a kitchen drawer for emergencies, and it was gone. We both agreed to get the locks changed that day. After that, things calmed down for a while, or at least they seemed to. A couple weeks later, Ethan told me he was moving out, said he got offered a better place closer to his job. I didn't mind. I figured I could find someone else soon enough. He packed his stuff, cleaned his room, and left on a Friday afternoon. That night was my first time alone in the apartment. It was weirdly quiet, but kind of peaceful. I watched a movie, then went to bed around midnight. At 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft clicking sound, like a door latch being moved. Then, Slow, deliberate footsteps again. I held my breath. They were coming from the hallway. I grabbed my bat and opened my bedroom door. But this time, I didn't see anyone. What I did see was Ethan's old bedroom, door closed. I knew I had left it open earlier that evening. My hands were shaking. I took a few quiet steps toward it. I could hear something. Inside, a faint shuffling, like fabric moving against the wall. I said, "Who's in there?" Silence. Then, the sound of breathing. Heavy, slow, human breathing. I swung the door open and froze. Inside, the closet door was cracked open, and someone's hand was gripping the edge of it. Pale fingers. I could barely see the outline of a face behind the coats. I shouted and swung the bat toward the closet. The person stumbled out. A thin, filthy-looking man, probably in his 30s, wearing a torn hoodie. He bolted past me and ran out the front door before I could even react. I called 911 immediately. When the police came, they searched the apartment and found a sleeping bag, food wrappers, and a few of my missing clothes inside that closet. That guy had been living there, sneaking in at night, through the old fire escape and hiding in Ethan's closet whenever we were home. They said it looked like he'd been doing it for weeks, maybe even before Ethan moved out. I moved out 2 days later. To this day, I still double-check every closet before I go to sleep, and I'll never live with a stranger again. Back in 2018, I was a college sophomore at a small university in Colorado. Dorm rooms were expensive, so I moved off campus into a shared apartment with 3 other students. One of them was a girl named Jessica. She was quiet, clean, and friendly, the kind of roommate you actually hope for. The apartment itself wasn't fancy. Old carpets, creaky doors, and a heating system that made weird knocking sounds at night. But it was cheap and close enough to campus to walk. At first, everything was normal. We went to classes, hung out sometimes, and had a simple rule: always lock the door when you leave. But one week in November, strange little things started happening. I'd wake up and find the bathroom light on, even though I knew I'd turned it off. Sometimes the fridge door would be cracked open in the morning. And one night, my backpack, which I had left on the floor, was on my desk when I woke up. I thought maybe Jessica came into my room to borrow something, but she denied it every time. "Why would I go into your room at night?" She'd laugh. Still, it kept happening. And every time, the stuff was just slightly moved, like someone had been in there, but didn't want me to notice. Then came the smell. A faint, rotten, sweet smell, like spoiled food. It came from the air vent near my closet. I cleaned the vent and sprayed air freshener, but the smell kept coming back. It was subtle during the day but strong at night, especially around 2 or 3 a.m. One night, around that time, I heard something that made my blood run cold. From the same vent, a faint sound. Not the heater, not pipes. It was breathing. Slow, uneven breathing. I froze, turned off my fan and listened again. There it was. An inhale, a pause, an exhale, like someone trying to stay quiet. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told Jessica about it. She said maybe a raccoon or something got into the ducts. But the building was old. The vents were sealed metal pipes, not big enough for an animal. Still, we called maintenance. They checked and said there was nothing. No animals, no blockage, no smell. They shrugged and left. That night I pushed my dresser in front of the vent. It made me feel a little better. Until 2 nights later. I got home from studying at the library around 11:30. Jessica was sitting on the couch, pale and shaking. When I asked what happened, she said, "Someone knocked on my door just now. I opened it thinking it was you, but no one was there. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. We called the building security, but they didn't find anyone. We both locked our doors and went to bed. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to a faint tapping sound, like fingernails against metal. It was coming from behind the dresser, from the vent. I grabbed my phone flashlight and shined it on the vent. The screws on the cover were loose, like someone had been unscrewing it from the other side. I stared for a good 30 seconds, frozen. Then, slowly, the vent cover moved. Something pushed it outward. Not hard, just enough to shift it a few inches. I screamed and ran out into the hallway, pounding on Jessica's door. She came running out, terrified, holding her phone. We called the police. When the cops arrived, they searched the apartment, everything. Looked fine, until one of them opened the small utility closet near the kitchen. Inside was a square metal grate, leading into the air duct system, and in that cramped space, lying on a pile of blankets and half-eaten food wrappers, was a man. He looked to be in his mid-30s, filthy, with stringy hair and wild eyes. He bolted as soon as the flashlight hit him, crawling into the vents like a rat. The officers chased the sound of banging metal through the walls until they finally caught him when he tried to exit. Through the basement vent, we later found out he was a homeless man who used to live in the building years ago. He'd been secretly living in the duct system for weeks, crawling out at night to steal food, sometimes even sneaking into rooms while we slept. The maintenance guys found small holes in several vents, where he'd cut away parts of the metal to look through into our rooms. That's why I'd sometimes hear breathing. That's why things kept moving. The smell? Rotting food he'd hidden inside the vents. When I told the police I'd pushed my dresser in front of the vent, one officer said something that still chills me to this day. He said, "You probably blocked the main vent he was using to crawl through. That's why he started loosening the screws from your side. He was trying to get back into my room." After that night, I packed up and moved out within 24 hours. Jessica left too. The apartment was sealed off for weeks while they repaired the ducts. For months after, I couldn't sleep without checking every vent and closet in whatever room I was in. Even now, whenever I hear the heater start, I swear I can still imagine that faint, steady breathing through the walls. This happened during my senior year of college in New Jersey. I was living off campus in a small 2-bedroom apartment with one roommate, a guy named Derek. We met through a campus housing group and seemed compatible. He was tidy, polite, and always paid his share on time. We had a simple agreement: split rent, keep common areas clean, be respectful. I never expected to regret that decision. At first, everything was normal. Derek worked a day job and sometimes stayed late at the library. I worked part-time and took night classes. We cooked some dinners together, watched a few movies, and generally did our own things. The apartment had cheap blinds, a sagging ceiling tile in the hallway, and a thin wooden door that never fully closed without a shove. Small things, nothing to worry about. Then one morning I woke up and noticed my laptop was slightly off the desk. Not moved far, just nudged. My wallet had been turned an inch to the left. I thought maybe I'd been half asleep and knocked it, so I shrugged it off. A few nights later, I noticed the little webcam cover on my laptop The sliding shutter I used to keep closed was open. It bothered me, but I told myself I must have forgotten to close it. Weeks passed, and the little things got stranger. My toothpaste cap was loose, my bookshelf had one book out of place, and my phone charger was unplugged, coiled on the floor like someone had used it and been too lazy to put it back. I started locking my door at night, even though Derek was usually home. He noticed and laughed it off. "Paranoid much? It's just us here." I forced a smile and tried to believe him. One Saturday night, Derek said he was going to visit his girlfriend out of town for the weekend. I was fine with that. I liked having the place to myself sometimes. I made dinner, watched a couple episodes of a show, and fell asleep on the couch around midnight. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I jolted awake. I felt cold. Something in the room didn't feel right. The hallway light was of F, but there was a faint glow coming from my laptop screen. The webcam cover was open again. I sat up and listened. The apartment was quiet, except for a faint creak above, like a ceiling tile shifting. I remembered the old, thin panel in the closet that never fit perfectly. The hair on my neck prickled. I took my phone and quietly checked the living room door. It was closed and locked. I checked my phone for messages. Nothing. Heart pounding, I walked toward my bedroom door, trying not to make noise. At the door, I saw a shadow move above, near the edge of the ceiling, and for a split second, I froze. The next morning, I decided to confront Derek. I knocked on his door and said, "Hey man, you back early?" No answer. When he came out later that day, he was oddly calm. "My girlfriend had to stay," he lied. I looked at him and felt something twist in my stomach. That evening, I went into his room while he was out and found his phone on the bed. I looked through the photos and found dozens of short video files. Some of them taken from the angle of my desk, some from the doorway of my bedroom, and worse, a few that clearly showed me sleeping. My hands shook. I closed the phone and left it where it was. I called the campus police and told them what I'd found. They asked me not to touch anything and came over to take a look. When they searched Derek's room, they found more than simple voyeur footage. Hidden in a drawer were small white USB drives labeled with dates. On Derek's laptop were apps that allowed remote activation of webcams. It was obvious he had been recording without consent. But the investigation revealed something even worse. While checking the apartment, one of the officers pulled up a loose ceiling tile in the hallway closet. Above it was a cramped crawl space running along the length of the apartment. Inside, tucked behind insulation and an old curled sleeping bag, they found a small void with handprints of dust and a flattened, worn patch of ceiling dust where someone had been sitting. There was a tiny folded blanket, a flashlight, and, disturbingly, a small notebook with entries describing times the narrator had watched the roommate sleeping and the exact way he brushed his teeth. Several entries were dated weeks before I even noticed. The laptop cover open. They asked Derek about the ceiling panel. He laughed nervously and said he'd never been up there. The officers didn't buy it. They dusted for prints and found Derek's fingerprints on the inside edge of the crawl space and on the underside of the very ceiling tile that had been moved. He was arrested that day for illegal surveillance and trespass. What I remember most from the interrogation was how matter-of-fact Derek was when they asked why. He said he liked knowing. "I wanted to see what you did when you weren't around," he told them like it was casual. He didn't cry, didn't apologize. He described watching the apartment's cameras, then physically climbing up into the panel when he wanted a closer view. He admitted to having a key and using it while I was in class or asleep. He said he sometimes left small gifts under my nightstand, old candy, a note. A detail that made the whole situation feel like a violation layered with delusion. I moved out 2 days later. I grabbed what I could, changed passwords, and filed for a restraining order. Sleep did not come easily. I would wake imagining a face peeking through the ceiling, imagining that someone had been sitting on that narrow patch above my bed, watching me breathe. I replaced locks, installed a simple webcam with a visible light, and put a noisy bell on my bedroom door. Small things that somehow made the world less open. What stuck with me wasn't just the physical invasion, it was the betrayal. Derek had been friendly, had laughed with me about stupid things, had borrowed my coffee and left it stained in the sink. I had invited him into my life in 1,000 tiny ways, trusting him with mail, with food, with quiet nights. And he used that trust as camouflage. The worst part was realizing how little I had noticed. The slight nudge of a laptop, the missing charger. They were all tiny signs that now felt like smudges, pointing to something darker. Months later, I still jump when I hear a loose tile shift, or when I see someone standing near an attic access. Sometimes I dream I wake up and find my webcam light on. When I think about that crawl space, the memory is sharp and cold. I wonder how many people live under someone's roof and don't know the eyes that watch them. It taught me to be careful, to lock doors, to check every panel and corner, to trust my instincts. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. The person you share the roof with can be the one who knows your smallest habits, the one who sees you at your most vulnerable. And sometimes, the thing that looks like normal life is just a setup for something that will haunt you for a long time.